Привет, меня зовут Bada Bing. Спасибо, что присоединились ко мне сегодня. Hey guys, Bada Bing here. If I murdered that pronunciation, I apologize. Trying to wrap my tongue around a Russian has been my lifelong goal ever since I first watched GoldenEye. This review has been a long time coming. While this is one of my favourites, I haven't really featured it much on the channel. I bought it in 2013 and after all this time I never reviewed it. Until now. Today I'll be looking at the GHK AKM GBBR, and the version I have, the AKM N, features the side optics mount. Today it appears to have been discontinued by GHK, so from now on you'll only find the slab-sided AKMs. Here I've put together a list of chapters and their cheat codes so you can skip to various points of interest. So, before we start the show, I want to thank you for joining me, and if you're finding me for the first time, welcome to my little corner of the internet. If you're liking what you're seeing so far, and who could blame you with this sexy piece of kit right here, why not stick around with me and subscribe? Also, if you'd like to give back to the channel, you can buy me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com. For as little as £1, you'd be helping my caffeine intake and help contribute towards future content. So, with that out of the way, let's do this. Yes, I bought this AKM way back in 2013 after spending months drooling over it. It comes in a plain old GHK box with its manual, speed loader and 40 round green gas magazine. It's well known that GHK partnered with LCT, GHK supplying their internal gas system and LCT taking care of the externals, which are superb. At the tip we find the steel slanted muzzle brake that backs onto the anti-clockwise thread and the front iron sight post. Oddly enough, the front sight post has the muzzle threading attached to it, like it's not part of the outer barrel at all. The iron sight post is attached to the end of the outer barrel, and it uses a pin and grub screw to hold it in place, so that's weird. This arrangement leaves some wiggle room, so I've reinforced its grip with some black tape. Running along the length of the barrel is the typical AK cleaning rod. Unlike the Tokyo Marui AKM, this one is completely functional, so long as you have the looped end for a cleaning patch. It doesn't come with one, so you're going to have to pick up one for yourself if you want to use it as such. The outer barrel doesn't necessarily look like this from the factory. Originally it has a black paint finish which is uninspiring, so I touched it up with some black grate polish for a more metallic and worn hue. The steel AKM gas block isn't anything special. Again, like the front sight, it uses a pin and grub screw to secure it to the outer barrel. Unrealistically, the bolt carrier's gas piston doesn't reach far enough to rest within it. Not that it really matters, as it's always concealed with the gas tube, but the more you know. GHK's laminated wood furniture is fine, although very shiny. Those legends out there that adore the wooden aesthetic generally replace these with real AK handguards. Myself, I don't have an issue with them. I'm rather satisfied with how they look and feel, so they'll do. The steel sight block features yet again more grub screws to lock to the barrel. Unrealistically, that barrel set screws into a trunnion, and then a further barrel nut is tightened up against the receiver. On newer AKs over the last few years, GHK have unfortunately drilled out the threads at an angle, so the barrels do not sit correctly and droop downwards, or angled anywhere but perfectly straight. Mine appears to be straight, so that's okay. In an identical arrangement to the front sight post, the rear iron sight adjusts in elevation only. It's not much use for airsoft guns, but it still slides up and down the distance settings and locks in place firmly. The stamped steel receiver set is the robust foundation of the entire rifle. The finish you get from the factory is okay, although I have touched it up here and there with great polish. As I mentioned earlier, this is the discontinued side optics plate version. I had no intentions with attaching an optic, but I still wanted the versatility. Negatively, these GHK receivers are roughly a centimetre longer than real AK receivers, so using a real top cover is out of the question, unless you create a new cut further in front of the original dust cover slot. Speaking of which, if you want to check out the compatibility with genuine AK parts, Real Fake Guns has a video on his YouTube channel. He does a lot of conversions and he's extremely knowledgeable. Tap the card here and show his channel some love. The trigger guard is the generic steel piece that is fastened to the receiver with yet more screws, not riveted like the real thing. I've done a little bit of modification to this in order to remove the slanted angle that it came with, so now it's more square. The original pistol grip is a brown plastic grip which felt cheap and flimsy, just awful, you don't want it. Along the way I replaced it with a Polish Bakelite grip to appease my half Polish ancestry. Finishing our flyover of the rifle, the AKM stock is a decent block of wood for your cheek to call its home. Standard features include a steel sling point and steel end plate with the trap door for a cleaning kit. The fitment to the receiver is okay, it has about 1/2 mm play and is barely noticeable, it's not too bad. The majority of the AKM's build is steel and of course laminated wood furniture, with alloy parts such as the outer barrel, bolt carrier assembly and some of the fire control parts. The rifle in hand is surprisingly lightweight, a feature I really like. Those magazines weigh a ton, and when you're carrying a bunch of them on your person, it's nice to have a lightweight rifle to offset the greater mass. Most of the weight saving must be due to the alloy outer barrel. Overall, the rifle is solid. There's no feelings of disappointment, nothing seems underwhelming about how it's put together, besides perhaps its use of grub screws holding much of the front assembly in place. These can end up getting loose during firing, so it is important to Loctite these parts. The entire frame, when it's pressed against your shoulder, feels godlike. The cold metal stock plate, the silky smooth wood furniture against your cheek, and the sensation of the bulge from the double vented handguard in your grip. All of these vibes results in an unmistakable feeling of power bestowed upon us by our Papa Mikhail Kalashnikov. There's nothing else that hits you quite like the feeling of an AK. To me, it's simply divine. As it's an AK, there's not too much in the way of controls. The selector switch is still as stiff as the first moment we met. It has a smooth charging action, thanks to all the years of work it's put in. The recoil spring is original and returns the carrier with a good amount of speed, although it's not a heavy spring like the available upgraded ones. It does the job, and I don't feel it's necessary to change it. The magazine release tab is fine, but the retaining pin becomes detached and causes the catch to come off. I've experienced this once during a game, and it's something I'm very conscious of when I'm out on the field with it. Locking the magazines into place can be a finicky affair. Getting the front lug to find its home, at the same time the BB feed lips are struggling to find the point in which the nozzle falls between them. It takes some practice to lock them into place if you're new to a rock and lock platform.
Внимание, говорит и показывает Москва.
Like I said before, the magazines are heavy beasts, and GHK also offers CO2 variants, so yeah, their AKs are CO2 ready. All of their AK magazines are compatible with all of their AKs from 2012 onwards. Whether it's 7.62 or 5.45 AK-74 style, they'll all fit each other. A good feature is the dry fire mode, which you can activate by carefully pulling out the bolt stop lever. Lightly grip this piece with pliers and then using the side wall of the magazine to slowly pry the lever outwards. You can now dry fire their AKs without it cutting out. Now, loading the magazines can be stiff at first, GHK and their infamous narrow feed lips coming into play again. Using their included speed loader with the adapter, hold it at an angle prior to transferring the BBs. To help get you started, push down on the bolt stop tab at the rear. This aids in beginning the flow. As soon as you get your new AK, the first thing you must do is put gas into the gas tank. GHK O-rings are made from wheat and barley, so they need gas pressure behind them to maintain a strong seal. Once they are sealed and stored with a few seconds worth behind them, they should be fine for years. I've maintained a gas seal on all but one of my magazines since 2013 just by ensuring they are never left without gas in them. Removing the steel shell and you can see the size of the gas tanks. Instead of using one large tank to store its fuel, GHK separate it into 2 tubes or vessels to contain the gas. The capacity is massive, and those tubes can be unscrewed for servicing, although the downsides is that it's another point which can develop leaks, so keep in mind to monitor them periodically. One more thing, the threading on the cast upper gas tank where those tubes attach can wear away and potentially blow off if it's exposed to hot temperatures. Say if it's left in the sun, or if it happens to be in a cozy trouser pocket. Trust me when I say you'll know it when it happens. The finishing touch that I have for my AKM are my real Ishmash Bakelite AK magazines that are converted to house the GHK internals. This custom job isn't something I'd recommend, considering the hazardous materials that Bakelite is made up from. Asbestos is something you're going to want to stay away from. I've made a rough guide, so use it at your own risk. Tap the link at the top of the screen. Looking at the internals now, and we can see how easily everything is laid out. It has to be one of the simplest gas rifles to work on. I said earlier that most of the internals are alloy or pot metal. Yeah, it's true. The only pieces which are steel regarding the fire control group are the pins, my upgrade FG Airsoft disconnector, and my recently installed W&S single hook AK trigger. That's about it. Compared to the original, the W&S trigger closely replicates the look of the real AK trigger, and in my opinion, it truly finishes off the AKM perfectly. Like every other GHK GBBR, it comes with a plastic hop-up chamber. This unit has gained a terrible reputation over the years for it being easily damaged. Even the slightest insignificant jam could destroy it. Doesn't fill you with a lot of confidence, does it? There are a few aftermarket metal chambers available, but it is highly debated which one is best. It's been ages since I stripped the AK down, and on this particular occasion I was surprised to find a tiny crack. That's the second chamber this AKM has chewed up, and now I think it's about time I selected a metal upgrade. This example is made by Bowmaster and is a direct copy of the original, so it accepts AEG barrels and rubbers. I don't imagine it'll change much in regards to accuracy with its stock barrel and rubber, so I'll put it to work with the existing GHK parts. Okay, let me stop the video right here. You know what I said earlier about the existing GHK parts? Yeah, well that's going to be a bit difficult, as those pieces are now destroyed. Looks like an upgraded barrel and bucking is in my future, so I can actually finish this review. Enter the Lambda 6.05 stainless steel barrel, and the PDI W hold 70° rubber. As my AKM is back up and running, let's resume. Much of the bolt carrier follows a similar design to the real one, however it has an unrealistic elongated block on the tail, and that contains the nozzle. The carrier is fairly lightweight and constructed of an alloy material. As you can see, it's had tens of thousands of cycles over the years, and it has the wear to prove it. The gas piston can be unscrewed or replaced entirely with an upgraded steel version that provides a heavier kick. Disassembling the carrier can be done by removing the one screw located on the left side. It's so easy and convenient. Within the lower, they use a plastic buffer to intercept the bolt carrier, and this prevents it from over-travelling. If you remove this plastic piece and fire the rifle, you will end up jamming the system, causing internal damage, and that's exactly what I did a few weeks after buying this. My guide rod is still bent out of shape. With the rifle set to fire and you charge the rifle for the first time, You may be expecting the bolt to travel far back into the rear trunnion. It doesn't. The GHK AK series all have half-travel bolt carriers. It does nothing for realism, and I know a lot of people would cringe at the idea. Of course the negative aspect is the realism, but the benefit of having a short-stroked AK is its incredible cyclic rate. Over the years, I've only had a handful of minor problems with this AKM. The most common issue, which you might find yourself with, is the nozzle jamming. The nozzle features guide tabs running along the top. Well, they used to be until I cut them off, so you just have to imagine they're still attached. These help keep the nozzle in a central position during cycling. Sadly, these wings can get damaged, and all it takes is just one of these to wear down or break off, and the nozzle will be out of alignment, and instead of load a BB, it'll harpoon itself into one side of the chamber or the magazine feed lips, stopping the action dead. Worst case scenario, it can jam a BB or two into the chamber and potentially break the plastic hop-up unit. This is exactly what happened to me. On the bright side, there is an easy fix. Just trim off both of these wings like I've done here, and it'll maintain position during firing. A month or so before releasing this video, I had a jam. The same incident I pointed out earlier. The BB tried to pull the rubber through the barrel along with it, and the BB following behind that is likely what caused damage to the inner barrel. After spending some time talking to the chaps on the Heavy Recoil Club, they recommended I address the slight misalignment on the feed ramp. It's not much, but you can see it's a fraction off centre. After 9 years and only a couple of bad jams, I didn't believe anything could be wrong with this chamber piece, but I guess it doesn't help, so I carefully took off 0.5 millimeter and it straightened it up a tiny bit. It's not much, but it's corrected the pathway to the hop-up. See that? Even on an old gun like this, it's no stranger to defects. The GHK AK nozzles do not feature a return spring. While they do just fine without them, I'd still prefer to have one. GHK should definitely look into this. Furthermore, because it lacks that return spring, the nozzle tends to pop out of the carrier when function checking without a magazine installed, and due to losing those guide tabs, a frequent consequence sees the nozzle pivot downwards, which ends up jamming the action. So that's yet another curse of the GHK AK system. The next thing to break was the disconnector during some rapid semi-auto fire. The tail end, which allows for automatic fire, snapped off. It was still able to run as normal on single shot, just no auto. This happened roughly 2 years into its life. After about 4 years, the bolt stop began to fail. It would continue to dry fire after the last BB had been fired. I searched for remedies and it was determined that the root cause was a worn hammer. Basically, it has a small notch which interfaces with the bolt stop lever, and it wasn't engaging properly, as it had worn in so much that it started to dry fire. Also, within the 4 years, one of the locking tabs on the hammer had broken off, so it only had one point of contact. I made use of the readily available GHK spares at the time, and was able to source a replacement, which arrived after a few days. The new hammer restored the bolt stop feature. Perfect. All in all, the AKM hasn't been without its problems, but to be honest, it's no big deal. Everything that's happened could be put right without breaking the bank, nor would you require a high degree of gas blowback technical skill. Again, it's so easy to work on.
I have infiltrated the former Soviet Union.
I have a 1-joule nozzle installed, and here's what we find at the Chrono. Over the course of 40 rounds with propane in a comfortable 22-degree room temperature, the AKM releases BBs that range upwards of 350s down to the 320s. The highest reading was at 357.7, and a single score was below the 320s at 317.8, before it climbed back up to the 330s. It saw an average of 338.6 on the 1-joule nozzle, and it can be increased or decreased accordingly with either a low flow nozzle, a standard, or a high flow nozzle from GHK, depending on what you desire. The gas efficiency, or shots per gas fill, is as you can imagine with magazines of this size. It has incredible output. Empty of gas, the AKM mag weighs a hefty 672 grams. Using a freshly filled can of propane and 5 seconds later, the AK smashed out 119 shots. 119. This was firing at a rate of 1 per second. Charging 10 seconds and the AKM was able to cycle its last shot at 202. Yes, we've managed to break past the 200 round barrier. This is the first GBBR I've had to record such a shot count. Charging 15 seconds of propane, but I think it stopped after 13 and the AKM ran the bolt upon its 215th shot. 216th cycle just barely made it move before it ran out of breath. So 215 shots from 22 grams of propane. Of course, this is an amazing score, but remember you only really need a maximum of 6 to 8 seconds for optimal performance. You will be in danger of shooting liquid gas through the system and shutting the gun down if you charge to those previous extremes. Throughout testing, I was floored by one 15-second charge, which awarded me 265 shots. Although, I didn't film that event, and I ran through 2 bottles of propane just chasing that score to no success. Of course, this is completely anecdotal without proof, so take that as you will, but it's interesting nonetheless. Shooting the AKM. This rifle is as sharp as a mouthful of Smirnoff, but without that kick. The AKM throws back the bolt surprisingly fast when it's your first time behind it. You might be expecting a heavy bombastic haymaker to the shoulder, because after all it is modelled after a 7.62 Kalashnikov. Not the case with this rifle. The recoil sensation is lighter than you might expect. Having said that, it's not gas blowback SMG light, it lets you know it's there, it's just not exactly indicative of the legend. It's an enjoyable thump that creates a crisp feedback, and you immediately sense it's able to chop through the competition, giving you all the confidence and taking your adversary's confidence away. It has that kind of report, much like the Marui M4 GBBR series. Combined with that deliciously finger-pleasing trigger action, you can manipulate the rifle to cycle almost as quickly as the fully automatic mode itself. It's such a good time, you will not get bored gunning around with it on a weekend event. It's one of those airsoft guns that has a tendency to make you infamous by the opposing forces. Like, oh, it's that guy with that angry AK again. It's savage. Fully automatic performance is among the best you'll find from a gas in mag GBBR. It's certainly the best I've ever used. That RPK I had spent much of its service one notch up from single shot, and it was loving it. No doubt GHK's incredible dual-tube gas system is responsible for maintaining an efficient delivery from 1 to 40, so it does do its best to help you across the finish line. Loading a minimum of 30 or 40 rounds and you have a good chance of seeing little to no cooldown during automatic fire. as the magazines can unofficially load more BBs than that, you will see it slow down if you fill beyond the advertised capacity. You can't override the effects of cooldown. Well, unless you attach one of those ridiculous hoses to your magazine.
What are you supposed to be, some kind of a cosmonaut?
So as long as you stick to a realistic capacity, it's not going to be a problem, and you won't have to walk around looking like some kind of a cosmonaut. Now, 10 seconds of propane, let's see how we do. Second mag. Again, burn through the second magazine. Not too bad. Third mag, why not? Nah, she's gone. The bolt stop mechanism doesn't operate like its Tokyo Marui or WE Tech counterparts. Following the final shot, the BB follower flicks the tab on the magazine, and that interacts with the lever inside the AK, and this prevents the hammer from dropping. Instead of dry firing, or getting a clunk from the hammer dropping on a deactivated valve striker, you just get a spongy trigger. That's it. Still, it does the job of ceasing the action, and it has been reliable. Well, apart from a couple of weeks of intermittent failures that I mentioned earlier. The trigger feels light as you squeeze it back. Once you've cleared 6mm or so, there's no indication of a wall. You seem to be pulling back with barely any resistance, and it breaks the shot. The reset has a short journey and arrives soon after the spring tension pulls your finger back forward. You receive a definitive clunk through your finger and in your hearing. The range of motion between where the shot breaks and the reset is fairly short. It's not a bad trigger at all, but if you're trying to make delicate shots, it can be difficult to anticipate where in the take-up it breaks.
Anna. She wouldn't know a woman if one came up and sat on his head.
GHK, AKM. Probably gonna fail, who cares?
Using the AK in cold weather produces okay results. Here it's 1 degree Celsius, snowing, and the rifle is at the same temperature as its surroundings. And to be honest, I thought it was going to need a 14 kilogram gas to help it run through. The report didn't sound confident, although surprisingly it was able to bring it home. This system can confidently run propane in temperatures as low as 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, with the right level of management. As you see here, mags kept in warm pockets is vital. If you're a winter player or milsimer and have been out patrolling all day in the cold, it's not going to be confident in its delivery, and it will struggle to pump out BBs to an acceptable distance. CO2 is your golden ticket to survival. I refilled the magazines a few times over, and you can see the strain it's putting on the rifle. If you're crazy enough to be playing army men in these conditions, invest in CO2.
Bit of a feed jam. Change mag shall be. Try again. A little bit cold out here today. Bakelite mag. Why not? And she's out.
Accuracy has always been mediocre. Honestly, it's like shooting a generic AEG with lightweight 2s, but this is using 3s. It's not unusable. On the field, I usually opted for fully automatic in order to achieve positive hits at range, much like most AEG users, coming back to its advantage on the fun mode again. The upgrades I mentioned earlier didn't seem to compress the groupings over its original components, apart from one final copy I printed last minute. I was able to punch 17 holes into the upper right side of the page, so it gives you some idea that, best case scenario, it can focus within a small space. At some point I might try a maple leaf chamber with its gas blowback type barrel set. Across the sheets of paper it goes from crap to okay, and then finishing with something that will raise an eyebrow. This gun teases me, it really does. This is the part where I squint into the abyss with the range test. I wish I had a scope mount for this AK. I need my magnified optics as I'm really struggling to see where the BBs are going. The range of the AKM isn't amazing. The original components don't lift heavy BBs very well, and the power output struggles to get them out to a good distance. At 40 meters on the calmest day I had, it didn't hit the target very much. It sends them into the general vicinity with no precision. The flight path was inconsistent and I couldn't easily predict where they would fly, so I had to plink towards it, hoping my rounds would connect. Again, it feels like I'm shooting an AEG with 2s. Hitting the target at 50 meters seemed even more unlikely. I put through a magazine with 2 8s and only connected with the mannequin once.
See if I can to the moon again. Oh, I think I got a hit there.
Using 3s and we see the BBs moving closer, most of which fall within a meter window of the target, with flyers wide left and right. Throughout a few magloads of BBs, I impacted the target a handful of times. It's definitely not repeatable. Sometimes the BBs could only reach so far and drop at or just below the 50 meter mark, depending on the usual factors that goes with gas guns. Under the heat of our British summer, it's currently 34 degrees Celsius, and I'm using the AKM with its new Lambda inner barrel and PDIW hold rubber. Despite these enhancements, I didn't gain anything from it. Perhaps touching upon 60 meters or just over was the only improvement I saw.
Hits. I think that was a hit.
time to use GHK's brilliant performance in fully automatic to my advantage. I'm able to rain down bursts of fire towards the target with several successful hits. It may not be a precision rifle, but the one thing you can count on is its ability as a machine gun. Best of all, it can maintain that distance. Throughout the magazine, it keeps punching them out to its maximum range. Of all aspects where this rifle may fall, it's great to see this part excel. The GHK, AKM, GBBR, time to break down the pros and cons. Their AK series all utilise stamped steel receivers, with the majority of the external components being steel too. This gives it a great baseline to build their AKs on. As a result, it looks beautiful and it's robust. The laminated wood is decent, so much so that I've never felt the need to replace it with genuine AK wood. These rifles have amazing shootability, every shot is fast and sharp. Gas capacity is certainly superior to other GBBRs I've used. Fully automatic performance for a GBBR of this size is fantastic. It runs like a freight train, and it's effective at carrying that automatic fire down range. This AK can operate well within cold weather. Using propane, it's good from 3 to 5 degrees Celsius if you are managing them well enough, and if it's any cooler than that, you have the ability to use CO2. You have several magazine options available: steel version, PMAG, 545 style, although it is incorrect for this particular model, and CO2 in 762 and 545 polymer varieties. Also remember, they feature the dry fire modes on these magazines too. This platform is easily disassembled. The wide open receiver, for example, makes it a breeze to learn and work around. Unrealistically, they have a slightly higher capacity than real, although it's nice having 40 rounds apiece, makes things a bit easier in the long run. ESD makes a drum magazine if 40 rounds isn't quite enough BBs for you. These rifles have the benefit of excellent third-party support, Hephaestus, R8Tech, W&S being among the main brands producing parts and upgrades for this series. And GHK have a good selection of models to choose from if you prefer the other variants. Now the bad news. You can't get these nowadays. Almost every site is out of stock of GHK AKs. They seem to be having a hard time keeping up with demand. The version I have has been discontinued. You won't find another AKM with the optics receiver plate anymore, which is a shame. Same with the RPK, that's gone. The bolt stop system is unrealistic. The trigger goes dead and spongy after the last shot, so of course we'd all prefer that loud clunk to indicate we're out. It's not exactly a foolproof design though. Pull back the charging handle a couple of centimeters and this primes the hammer to drop and dry fire, overriding the bolt stop mechanism. The receiver itself is longer than the real AK, so real dust covers are not compatible. While real handguard and stocks fit with little to no modifications required, dust covers aren't a drop-in fit because the LCT receivers are longer in order to swallow the gearboxes. The plastic pistol grip it comes with is junk. It's doing a massive disservice to the otherwise handsome externals. The front sight, gas tube and sight block can become wobbly as it uses grub screws to tighten them down to the barrel, and they're easily lost under the recoil. The recoil from a stock rifle is heavy enough to shake the screws loose, but not as heavy as one might expect. Their AKs all feature half-travel bolt carriers. Doesn't bother me, but it is a big turn-off for a lot of people. These rifles are expensive, magazines too. Spare part support used to be good. For example, I used to be able to find a variety of replacement parts from UK sites, but over the last few years, stocks have dwindled, and if it's not third-party upgrades you're looking for, then you'll likely only find your replacements from Asia. The hop-up chamber is made from plastic and extremely prone to damage. The rifle uses an AEG format for its inner barrel and rubber, so it's not ideal for a rifle that strips a BB from the magazine and funnels it into an exposed thin rubber lip. The magazines can experience feed jams within the feed tube, and the feed lips themselves can be tight and suffer from feeding issues too. Apart from the newer G-Mags, the magazines are heavy. Carrying a battle load of these things over a weekend is going to leave you fatigued. The O-rings on the magazine valves are prone to leaks. They aren't as resilient as other brands I've used and require a bit more TLC. Performance from the hop and barrel set leaves a lot to be desired, and many users have units which just don't shoot straight out of the box. The rifle's internals and working parts are not made from steel, or I should say the bolt carrier and most of the fire controls are not made from steel, so on some of those high impact parts they'll have a limited lifespan. The nozzle doesn't feature a return spring. The nozzles are also glued together from the factory, so users cannot service or modify them. The nozzle guide tabs are brittle and will wear away, or wear unevenly, which then creates feeding issues that could end up destroying the hop. And then just when you thought this negative list wasn't long enough, the alignment of the feed ramp or even the trunnion can be a fraction off centre, or possibly more, depending on if they took the time to make sure it was straight from the factory. This would induce feeding issues that can result in the previous mentioned problem. And that brings me along to discuss the infamous quality control.
One thing only, please.
People seem to think that this is a side effect from COVID, but it's not really the case. GHK have always been known to neglect one of the fundamental processes that goes into manufacturing, and it's difficult to know for sure the frequency of good amongst the bad apples. So, are they worth it? Sadly, I'm going to have to say no, purely for the fact that there's just no telling what will end up at your door. Unfortunately, the reports from various sources lead me to advise caution. For example, if the trunnion is drilled out at an angle which results in the barrels pointed way off, that's a substantial cock-up from GHK. When the community calls it playing the GHK lottery, you know it's trouble. Not one or two people, but a whole community of users. Red flag, walk away. I wish I could be more positive, but unless they buck up their ideas, there's no way I could confidently recommend them. Of course, people have had pleasing experiences too, and sometimes they move on to other things and end up selling their functional wonders on the used market, and that is where you'd likely be better off if you're determined to adopt this gas AK. When you get a good one, it's great fun, and you can enjoy all the benefits I listed earlier. I certainly have. Despite my fairly insignificant problems, I feel I've gotten away a lot easier than some unfortunate souls.
I must break you.
If you're new to GBBRs and you're looking for a gas blowback AK, it might be best looking elsewhere, as there's so many variables that could hinder your overall enjoyment. If you're a veteran GBBR user and one of your kinks is to be abused by that red flag girl, like this guy, go for it. She's sexy, but Xenia will punish you if she comes with daddy issues.
Xenia, I can't breathe.
From a collector's point of view, it would be a handsome piece, if you can stomach the price tag and the half-travel bolt. At the time of filming, the W&S full travel kit is in rather short supply, so you're better off with a WE if you prefer that feature. May not look as fine as GHK's, but you'll get the full travel sensation for about the same money, perhaps a little cheaper. And that's my review of this beautiful, but flawed gas blowback rifle. To look at an extremely detailed breakdown of this platform, I highly recommend joining the GBBR Heavy Recoil Club. Scroll down to the GHK AK section, and the pinned comments are a goldmine of information from experts. Absorb the information available, and it could save you a lot of headaches going forward. Links in the description. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It's been a long road getting this made, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support my channel, all you have to do is like, share and subscribe. And of course, if you'd like to help me out further, you can always donate to the channel by buying me a cup of coffee. Links also in the description. For regular updates, you can follow me on Facebook and on Instagram. So until next time, look after yourselves. Spasiba. Das Vidania.